Howdy, yeah.
Oh, that's me. Hello, penitent one. Sure looks like I need an abortion. Yeah, I've got one growing inside me. Now, you're gonna scramble its brains or just vacuum it out?
Towering statues arise from the earth of Custodia, lifting upon high the temple of the city of the blessed name, separating its people from their holy place of worship. High above this temple, pulsating in the sky like a bloated tumor, a divine heart beats. And within this heart, a malevolent being of immeasurable power grows. Resurrected for an unclear purpose, the penitent one in silence ascends from his cold tomb to pick up arms once again. Man, I don't know what to tell you. This game's great, which is impressive because I went in with low expectations. I was fully prepared to not like this game over its predecessor. It's not so much I'm one of those guys who always thinks the original is better. For instance, I think Ori and the Will of the Wisps is far superior to Blind Forest. Yet, I had my reservations for Blasphemous 2. The upgraded graphics, the premise, the cutscenes art style, it all looked and felt not blasphemous. And I'll get into what that means in a little bit. But all those things are superficial. Surely the sequel brought more to the table than a fresh coat of paint. So I pushed my prejudices aside to dive eagerly back into the messed up world of Custodia, willing to give it a fair shake to see if it lives up to the original's legacy and to answer the question, does Blasphemous 2 surpass the original Blasphemous? As far as combat's concerned, Blasphemous 2 crushes the original and it isn't even close. The penitent one may have lost the mea culpa, but he more than makes up for the loss in the sequel. 3 weapons replace the guilty sword. The Rego al Alba, which basically plays like the mea culpa. The Sarmiento y Centella, rapier and dagger combo for you lame dex builders. And the manly, testosterone-driven, big boy itself, the Veredicto, the giant mace that just breaks the game. It's pretty obvious which weapon is the best. The Veredicto absolutely crushes the other weapons with its ability to stagger its opponents, as well as literally crushing your enemies. And its range only makes it more deadly. Sure, it's slow, but just learn to jump while attacking, and you're good. You only get to choose one weapon in the beginning, but you'll find the others soon enough. For my first playthrough, I chose the Rego al Alba. For my second, I chose the Sarmiento y Centella, which I feel the speedrunning community will likely choose as their starting weapon because it unlocks a lot of the map out the gate. And getting the Veredicto as your second weapon is pretty quick and unlocks a lot more. But we'll see what the speedrunning community chooses. They're an unpredictable bunch. Weapons can be swapped on the fly, which feels and works great, and each weapon has special attributes. Like an elemental affinity that can exploit enemy weaknesses, unique abilities like parrying and activating fiery death mode, and the only reason you would ever swap the Veredicto for anything else, ability gating functionality. Unlike the first game, Blasphemous 2 cranks the MV dial all the way to 11. The critical path is littered with obstacles, and abilities are necessary for progression. The key to overcoming most of these obstacles lies in your weapons. The Rego al Alba does a ground pound, the Sarmiento y Centella lets you teleport short distances via special mirrors, and the Veredicto rings bells, whose tintinabulation activates special platforms and doors. Listen, I learned the word tintinabulation in middle school while reading Edgar Allan Poe's The Bells, and this was the first time I could ever apply it naturally, so I wasn't going to miss this opportunity, alright? The other ability gating moves you unlock are wall jump, double jump, air dash, and little flying babies you can grab onto to reach new heights. Albeit for that last one, these abilities are pretty standard for an MV, which is both disappointing and great. Disappointing in that it deviates from the original's precedent and makes the game very much like a traditional MV, and great in that it feels excellent to have advanced movement options in combat, something the original sorely lacked. Ultimately, all the ability gating moves in Blasphemous 2 are welcome if not a little boring. And the fact that you have to switch weapons to gain certain abilities adds to the overall fun and design of the game's platforming challenges. That's something new in this game, fun and interesting platforming. The original's idea of a platforming challenge was basically dodge all this crap and try not to get impaled by insta-death spikes. Oh, spikes and pits are no longer instant kills in this game, so that's cool. Anyway, in Blasphemous 2, there's all kinds of platforming goodness to be had thanks to all the movement upgrades. Jump off a wall, slash a mirror to teleport to a bell, switch to the Veredicto to activate the special platform, land on the platform, then jump off and air dash through a laser so you can switch to the Rego al Alba and do a ground pound to shatter the floor and get to a new area. Scenarios like this aren't uncommon and are always a blast to pull off, especially if you activate one of those statues that opens a time-sensitive door. This game really likes to keep you on your toes, and it's all the better for it. Progression in Blasphemous 2 is also superior than its predecessor. In the original, you could increase your HP and MP/Fervor, upgrade your sword with a tiny skill tree, equip prayers, and equip sword cores and rosary beads to alter your Penitent One's build. It worked, but ultimately you didn't really feel that much more powerful from the start of the game versus the end. Blasphemous 2 remedies this by giving each weapon its own multi-tiered skill tree and by implementing a tried and true leveling system, which is always a welcome addition. Leveling up doesn't come with stat increases, but with marks of martyrdom, essentially skill points. You use these skill points in one of two ways. The first is to upgrade your weapons and stats via the aforementioned skill trees. Here, you can gain different moves and functions of your weapons, as well as increase base defense and weapon damage. It's nice and adds to the feeling of improving your character as you play, and essential for MVs. The second thing skill points are used for are to increase the slots on your altarpiece of favors. The altarpiece is just like rosaries, but a little more versatile. Basically, you place tiny figures into the slots like you're a weeb. Each figure gives bonuses, like damage or other things like recovering HP over time, and coupling certain figures together adds additional bonuses called resonances. It was always a nice surprise to pair up random figures to discover a new resonance. Overall, an outstanding addition. The one critique I have with Blasphemous 2's progression system is that it almost exclusively relies on game-spanning NPC side quests. You want to increase your HP? Take this chalice to the nice lady getting her skin flayed by babies. Want to increase your fervor? Go kiss that weird, arrogant giant hand. In the original, you found a lady with swords in her chest and little bird bats to increase your HP and fervor, respectively, and these increases were instant. In Blasphemous 2, you have to find stuff and then trek back to NPCs to get your reward. Not only is this time consuming, but making every quest giving NPC stationary is kinda boring. I loved how NPCs moved around the map in the original, much like how Dark Souls does in its side quests. It just made the world feel more lived in and added to the thrill of exploration. It's tough to say which game's approach to side quests is better, but I didn't mind frequently revisiting NPCs in Blasphemous 2 because there was so many of the weirdos to talk to. And that was something I was really hoping Blasphemous 2 nailed, introducing new, creepy, ridiculously gross NPCs. And blessed be the miracle, they've done it. Some of the more disturbing NPCs you discover are really disturbing. Nothing beats Nacimiento from the original, but there's one in a later biome that comes pretty dang close. So yeah, they nailed the gross NPCs again. But what they didn't nail, unfortunately, was the boss encounters. I might get some heat for this hot take, but the boss fights in the original were so much better than the ones in the sequel. Blasphemous 2's boss fights are good and provide a decent challenge, but they just didn't reach the heights of the first game, mainly in creativity and grandeur. Remember how I said this game felt not blasphemous? One of my main reservations stemmed from an early opening cutscene that introduces the game's antagonist as if they're some kind of League of Evil Villains, like it's a freaking Saturday morning cartoon. It felt silly and completely clashed with the game's macabre tone. My reservations weren't unsounded, it seemed, as each of the bosses in this League of Evil were like you, but a little different. I don't know, it just didn't hit right. Now, there are bosses outside of this League of Evil that feel reminiscent of the original, so don't get too bummed. There's some creepy weirdness to be had, but none of these boss encounters are terribly intriguing, save the final boss. The only argument I can entertain about the sequel's bosses being better is if someone felt the sequel's encounters were more challenging or engaging. I can see more engaging, but I didn't feel any of the bosses were challenging. I'll admit the boss before the final boss had some spice, and there was a particular boss I got stuck on early in the game that set a weird precedent that ultimately screwed with my expectations for the rest of the game. But let's put a pin into that right now, because to fully understand what I mean by that, we'll have to talk about exploration first. Blasphemous 2 is structured very similarly to the first game. You gotta get 3 MacGuffins in whatever order you want, then the latter half has you getting more MacGuffins in a linear order. Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The openness in Blasphemous 2 feels more open than the original because there's a ton more biomes to explore. And the structured portion feels more adventurous because it has you go into all corners of the map. Overall, despite the design being derivative, it's bigger and better this time around. That's not to say it doesn't have its drawbacks. Unlike the first game, enemies in Blasphemous 2 didn't seem to scale in order to guide players in any specific direction. In the first, though the game was open, Enemies leading to the convent of Our Lady of the Charred Visage were beefier than the ones leading to Mercy Dreams. The devs really couldn't do this in the sequel because the game's opening portion is so dependent on the starting weapon you choose. In order to make the game fair regardless of your starter, enemies in the first half had to be equal across the board. This might sound like a lame move at first, because you might think its lack of enemy scaling would make the Penitent one too OP in the early game if players chose to grind. Remember, there's a leveling system this go round. However, those clever devs thought of that. Though you could grind to level up, there's a cap set to 40, but more importantly, any significant stat boosts for damage and defense are locked behind weapon upgrades that can only be found, you guessed it, in the latter portion of the game when you actually need them. Of course, better figures for your altarpiece and stronger beads for your rosary are found later as well. So the early enemies not scaling isn't an issue. Unless you found the one biome accessible in the early game that did scale the enemies to be too tough for early players. Okay, remember that pin I told you to put into something? It was about a particular boss I got stuck on early in the game and how it set a weird precedent on my expectations for the rest of the game. For those who've played Blasphemous 2, it was the knife boss with the pan flute. He was my second boss, and I'd estimate that he should be the 4th or 5th. Needless to say, I was grossly underprepared. I only had 3 bile flasks, maybe 1 health upgrade, no good prayers. He absolutely trounced me for a good half hour. Eventually, my stubbornness overcame his bullshit, and I won. And my reward was the double jump, and how glorious it was. But here's where my expectations took a hit. Every boss after him, besides the penultimate boss, was absolute cake. Like iron striking iron, this encounter had hardened me. The stuff I had found on the advanced path toward him, and the experience I had gotten from the encounter, allowed me to bulldoze through the rest of the game's bosses. Moreover, getting the double jump super early trivialized the early game's puzzles and platforming challenges. I had accidentally stumbled into a scenario where I became OP too early and broke Blasphemous 2, and I loved the game for it. You'd think making the game too easy would be a negative thing, but not if you earn the right to make the game too easy. Whether intentional or not on the devs' part, they created one heck of a reward for intrepid explorers. That's one of the best things with Blasphemous 2. Exploration's rewarded at almost every turn. There are so many secrets to discover, beads and figures to find, shortcuts to open, bedridden old ladies to kill, and weird NPCs to be freaked out by. You're going to want to explore this new Custodia, especially because the biomes are so cool. Not only do they look nice, some are very creative and actually add some interesting new mechanics to the mix, like the church with warp points that let you walk off the screen and appear on the other side, and the palace that flips the dungeon like Symphony of the Night. And the overall level design complements the new and improved Penitent one with all his fancy traversal abilities. The world's general design is pretty simple, with a hub town in the center and everything branching off of it. And the in-game map has a legend that labels points of interest automatically, as well as gives players control of laying down markers. And you need to use these markers, because you're going to find a bunch of stuff you'll need to backtrack to. And backtracking isn't so bad this time around. Not just because of the shortcuts, but because fast travel is given to you pretty early. Sort of. Fast travel starts pretty lousy, with a prayer that returns you to the hub town, but soon you'll find warp rooms and finally the ability to travel between Prie-Dieux, the game's bonfires. Prie-Dieux are everywhere in this game, so fast travel between them is huge. Though I appreciate whenever I'm given fast travel in Metroidvania, I'll always complain if it's not given to me as soon as possible and for free. Ender Lilies has spoiled me like that. Since I brought up the bonfires comparison, I guess now's as good as any to remind everyone that Blasphemous 2 is a Souls-like / Soulsvania with corpse running, though guilt is a little different in this game. You still lose a portion of your fervor bar upon death, and you can still recover your soul or whatever to regain your lost bar, but it doesn't always fix everything. Accumulate enough guilt, i.e. die too much, and your bar won't recover until you confess your sins to an NPC in town. It's kind of obnoxious. I'm not really sure why they did this. Minor spoilers, but guilt has nothing to do with the true path in this game, so this entire transaction is just annoying for annoying's sake. But it does add to the game's atmosphere. And boy is there atmosphere in this game. So much atmosphere. More atmosphere than you can shake a stick at. The atmosphere in this game, woo! I'm sorry. I just spoke about Blasphemous' atmosphere in my last video and thought it'd be redundant to talk about it again. Just know that it's largely the same and still really good. The NPCs are gnarly, the speech is as pretentious as it is long-winded, and the murky pixel aesthetic is as sublime as ever. It's a fantastic continuation to the world we've all grown to fear and love. The music is better this time around, not that it was ever bad. It's not something you'd throw on during a road trip, but it gets the job done while you're playing. My one critique about the atmosphere, and unfortunately it's a big one, is that the cutscenes are too pretty. I know that sounds like a backhanded compliment, but I swear it's not, and I'm genuinely upset about it. The cutscenes are vivid, high-quality affairs that completely clash with the grisly tone afforded by the in-game graphics, adding to the not blasphemous feeling. I'm not sure why they chose to have the cutscenes art style differ so drastically from the rest of the game, but I feel they could have gotten rid of all of them and the game would have been better for it. Maybe that's a hot take, but I'll die on that hill. Okay, I guess I have a couple other minor complaints. My first is the Penitent One's sprite. He has a single wooden arm that switches arms whenever he turns. It's nitpicky, but it actually bothers me a little. It's possible to remedy that, but I've heard from devs that it's really difficult to code two different 2D sprites facing two different directions in an action game. So I won't hold it against the Game Kitchen. My other complaint is the palette swaps. Naturally, the enemies in Blasphemous 2 look amazing and are as delightful as they are repugnant to look at. But the last few dungeons resort to palette swapping. I know it's a time-saving thing and not a lazy thing, but it's disappointing nonetheless. Speaking of being disappointed, now we've arrived to the aspect of the sequel that I thought was weaker than the original. The narrative. Just like in the first game, the narrative's obtuse and requires some reading and piecing together. But I just didn't feel it this time around. It could be that the mystery of the miracle had run its course for me, but I think the narrative just wasn't as strong. And the path to the true ending, though incredibly unique, was a major misstep. I gushed over the original's true path for its use of creative logic and thematic relevance, but I can't say the same about Blasphemous 2. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. I actually couldn't figure it out and had to look it up. Once I knew what to do, I could see the clues all over the place. But for the life of me, I don't know how somebody could have pieced that all together themselves. If anyone has any insights, let me know in the comments. But as it stands, Blasphemous 2's path to the true ending is esoteric for esoteric's sake. Very disappointing. And hey, since I've already dealt out a couple of hot takes, what's the harm in throwing out another one? The endings in Blasphemous 2 suck.
Oh, DD, oh, what it is, oh!
The bad ending's interesting, but the true ending is just too sappy. And maybe you like that. Me, I laughed because it was so stupid. I didn't think they'd be able to top the amazing endings of the first game, but I at least expected them to try. Now, don't let my distaste for the ending stop you from playing this amazing game. I still enjoyed my second playthrough, even though I knew the ending was butt. Also, the boss of the game is butt. He's ridiculously easy, and doesn't even get another phase once you start the fight on the true path. I will say that you can get both endings on a single save file, unlike in the original where you can actually lock yourself out of the true ending if you skip a step. So, Blasphemous 2 has that going for it. I think it's obvious, though I have my critiques, that I think Blasphemous 2 is an outstanding game. But that's not what you want to hear. You want to know if Blasphemous 2 is better than the original Blasphemous. That's tougher to answer cleanly. Is Blasphemous 2 a better video game? Yes. Is it a better Metroidvania? Also yes, in some respects. Blasphemous 2's combat is leagues ahead of its predecessor, and it's a more traditional Metroidvania that hits every genre beat with high class and mastery. So, why do I feel that the first Blasphemous is better? Am I biased? Perhaps. Biases are tough to overcome, but I think it's Blasphemous' 2 by-the-book approach that brings it down for me. The first Blasphemous was so unique in its take on the Metroidvania formula, hiding secrets upon secrets and concealing layers of the world for only the most diligent explorers to discover. It was wondrous, and I never got a sense of wonder while playing the sequel. It all felt rote. Not that that's a bad thing, some people may consider Blasphemous 2's heavy leaning toward a more traditional MV formula a strength. I personally don't think that, but I don't want you to think Blasphemous 2 is a bad game by any means. I'll reiterate, it's an outstanding game, and I think many people will prefer it over the first simply because the combat and progression are so much better. I can definitely see the argument that Blasphemous 2 is the superior game. If you value combat and gameplay above all else, Blasphemous 2 wins hands down. But if you have an unhealthy love for Metroidvanias like me and appreciate the finer aspects of the genre, Blasphemous 2 comes up short when compared to the original. The first game has a better, more cohesive atmosphere, a better path to the true ending, better endings, a better narrative, better theming, better bosses visually and creatively, and more interesting side quest structures. Overall, Blasphemous 1 is the better immersive experience. Ironically, if I were to pick which one I wanted to play a few years down the road, I'd probably pick Blasphemous 2 over the original because it's more fun to play. So take that for what it's worth. Recommendation time. Should you play Blasphemous 2? In the world of Custodia, is guilt, repentance, mourning, and every pain of the soul of all kinds visible and tangibly manifested everywhere and in all of us? Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that it is. I don't care who you are. If you're a Metroidvania or indie game fan, you should play Blasphemous 2. It's fun, it's interesting, and the difficulty has been dialed down a smidge so that even some games journalists were able to get through some of the early biomes. Praise be to the grievous miracle, and may you start your pilgrimage sooneth rather than latereth. Wow, endings are hard. Maybe I shouldn't give the game so much grief for its lame ending. Whatever. Your ending sucks, Blasphemous 2. Give us DLC! I want New Game Plus!